It was raining the kind of rain that drapes itself over everything. Heavy, gray, and indifferent. The kind of rain that muffles sound and washes the color out of the world. I remember watching it run down the glass of my office window, each drop tracing its own slow descent like it had nowhere better to be. I had arrived early that day, like always. The kettle in the staff kitchen was still clicking to a boil. The office lights flickered on with a low hum as I settled into my chair and opened the first spreadsheet of the day. I didn't know that within an hour I'd be packing my things into a cardboard box under that same flickering light, with a silence so sharp it felt like it could cut. My name is Eleanor Marsh, and this is what happened. He walked in late. Nathan. Crisp navy suit, tailored within an inch of its life, sunglasses still on despite the lack of sun, confidence leaking from his smirk like perfume too strong for the room. His cologne arrived before he did. Everyone noticed. Eyes shifted. Chairs straightened. It was his first day. The prodigal son of Mr. Halden, returned from business school to modernize operations. No one said it out loud, but we all knew what that meant. Cuts, rebranding, and a lot of backhanded innovation. He made a speech, something about efficiency, new energy, streamlining departments. I listened, fingers folded in my lap, nodding politely as the air grew thinner. When his eyes finally landed on me, there was a pause, just long enough to feel it. Eleanor Marsh, he said, squinting at the name as though it offended him. Could you step into my office for a moment? It wasn't his office. Not really. It was still his father's oak desk and leather chair untouched. But I stood anyway, and I followed. He didn't sit. He leaned, arms crossed, not a wrinkle in sight. I've looked at the reports, at the structure, and quite frankly, I think this place needs to move forward. No offense. You've done your time. But I think it's best we part ways. It was said so smoothly, like reading off a menu. No recognition of 17 years. No thank you. Not even the decency of hesitation. Just a line, drawn clean through everything I'd ever built. I didn't speak right away. I looked at the bookshelf. Behind him, still filled with Mr. Halden's old maritime prints and dusty corporate awards. A storm at sea. A ship caught in the swell. Funny, I thought. He has no idea he's on one. I stood. I'll gather my things. Back at my desk, no one said anything. The office felt colder, smaller somehow. I slid open drawers that had once held birthday cards, emergency chocolate, the stray paperclip army of a working life. I found the ceramic mug my niece painted for me. The corner photo of Mum and I in Brighton, the one I'd tucked behind the monitor. Into the box they went, each item laid carefully like I was packing pieces of myself. No tears. No scene. Just the soft clatter of keys as I left them on the desk, badge and all. The rain was still falling as I stepped outside, but it wasn't loud anymore. Just steady, relentless, cleansing. And in the back of my mind, something small and sharp began to turn. You don't stay 17 years at a job unless, at some point, it starts to feel like a second skin. I started at Halden Co. When the office still smelled like printer toner and new carpet. The windows rattled in the wind back then, and the accounting software was older than half the interns we hired, but I stayed. Through mergers, staff reshuffles, endless Christmas parties with cheap wine and awkward speeches, I stayed. I was never flashy. I didn't chase titles or toss around buzzwords. I just did my work, and I did it well. People came to me when things went sideways, when a vendor went missing, or payroll glitched, or a client threatened to walk. Ask Eleanor, they'd say. She'll know what to do. And I always did. Not because I was brilliant, just consistent, present. I remembered birthdays, I covered shifts. I knew who took sugar and who didn't. I had keys to the supply closet and the passcode to the server room. I was the quiet current beneath the surface that kept everything moving. Mr. Halden used to say, if the roof collapsed, Eleanor would still get the quarterlies out on time. I thought it was a compliment. Now I see it was more of a shrug, dependability mistaken for disposability. I never asked for much, just dignity. A little acknowledgement. Not even a raise most years, just a nod in meetings. A seat at the table, even if I didn't speak. I knew I wasn't irreplaceable, but I thought I was at least seen. The worst part wasn't that Nathan fired me. It's that his father didn't stop him. He must have known. Nathan didn't make decisions on his own. Not really. The knife always has a shadow behind it. I thought maybe I'd get a call, an apology, even a formal reference letter. But the phone never rang. The silence was louder than any insult could have been. At home, I placed the cardboard box on the kitchen table. It looked ridiculous there. A lifetime of work in a flimsy container next to a half-eaten apple and unopened post. I pulled out the mug, ran my finger over the chipped paint. Eleanor the Magnificent, it read in childlike handwriting. Funny. How something can make you smile and ache at the same time. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the box. Then I folded the flaps shut, pushed it aside, and opened my laptop. Not for job hunting. Not yet. First, I needed to remember. Everything. Nathan Halden had the kind of arrogance that didn't need volume. It wore tailored shoes, drove a leased Jaguar, and sipped oat milk lattes while checking stocks mid-meeting. He didn't ask questions. He gave instructions disguised as conversation. He called it modern leadership. I called it inherited hubris. He breezed into the company like he was allergic to history. Never once asked how things worked, just assumed he knew better. On his second day, I heard him say to one of the younger staff, "We're doing away with all that legacy stuff. My dad ran this place like a retirement home. We're in a new era now." A new era. That's what he called it when he shut down departments, reassigned loyal staff to meaningless roles, and replaced functioning systems with flashy software he didn't know how to use. I watched spreadsheets break, invoices vanish, and tempers flare. But no one said anything, not out loud. Nathan had the one thing none of us did: his last name on the sign. What unsettled me most wasn't his inexperience. It was his eyes. They were empty of gratitude. Even his father, for all his flaws, knew how to nod at effort. Nathan looked through people, not at them. There was one afternoon I'll never forget. He walked past the break room where Maria, our receptionist of 11 years, was quietly crying after learning her hours were being cut. Nathan paused, looked in, and then laughed. A small, dismissive chuckle. Like emotion was a foreign language. He fired Colin, our IT guy, because he wore outdated shoes. Told a pregnant marketing associate she needed to project more energy. Every day became a roulette wheel. Who would he target next? People started deleting personal files. Some left before they were pushed. The place began to rot from the inside, and I just observed. I kept quiet, kept polite. I made tea for the juniors when their hands shook. I helped clean out Maria's desk when no one else offered. I kept smiling, soft, practiced, professional, while something inside me started to shift. Nathan thought he had all the power, but he hadn't earned fear, only resentment. He couldn't see that when people stop trusting a leader, they don't fight. They disappear. But me? I didn't disappear. I waited. Sometimes silence is the sharpest sound in the room, and mine was getting louder by the day. I left the box untouched on the table that evening. It sat there like an unwelcome guest, silent and judgmental. I moved around it carefully, as though bumping it might break something I hadn't yet labeled fragile. My apartment had always been modest, warm, quiet, the kind of place that smelled like old books and bergamot. But that night, everything felt colder, too still. I boiled water out of habit, dropped a tired tea bag into a chipped mug, and sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing, in particular. The tea steeped too long. It tasted bitter. I didn't cry. I think I was past crying. Or maybe I just didn't know how anymore. I kept going over the moment Nathan fired me. The tilt of his head, the smug curve of his mouth, the way he didn't even pretend it was difficult. And the worst part? I had seen it coming. The moment his shoes crossed the threshold, I knew the wind had shifted. I thought about the emails I'd sent that were never answered. The late nights covering for other people's mistakes. The birthdays I missed with family. The weekends lost to quarterly reports. I gave so much of my life to that place. And all it took was one boy in a suit with a surname to make it vanish. The clock ticked softly from the hallway. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Life kept moving, indifferent. I got up, wandered to the bookshelf in the corner. My eyes landed on an old framed photo, Mum and I at the beach years ago. She had windblown hair and sand on her cheeks, and I was holding a seagull feather like it was a prize. She always said I was too patient, that people would mistake my calm for weakness. Put the frame down and looked out the window. Rain again. The street lamps cast long golden shadows across the pavement. I watched them blur through the streaks on the glass. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was something deeper. Like something had shifted under my feet, and the ground was rearranging itself. Not for collapse, for clarity. Nathan thought he'd ended something, but I had the strange, still certainty that something had just begun. Sleep didn't come easy that night. When it did, it was thin and restless, slipping away at the first creak of the building settling. At 3 a.m, I gave up pretending. I switched on the lamp and sat at the edge of the bed, the old, wooden floor cold under my feet. There was a filing cabinet pushed against the wall, its gray paint chipped and worn at the corners. It didn't match the rest of my furniture. I had bought it years ago when my work started bleeding into my home life. I kept contracts, tax forms, forgotten notebooks, and something else. I knelt down and pulled at the bottom drawer. It jammed, as always, protesting after years of neglect. I wiggled it free and dug through the neatly labeled folders until my hand brushed against metal, a small battered USB drive taped to the underside of the drawer. It was heavier than I remembered. I had almost forgotten about it. Years ago, Mr. Halden had asked me, instructed me, to tidy up some financial statements before an audit. Nothing criminal, he assured me, just a little creative smoothing. At the time, I told myself it wasn't my place to question, but I couldn't erase the unease that lingered. So I made a backup, just in case. It wasn't just the books I had saved. Over the years, I had quietly archived emails, memos, signed contracts, evidence of a culture that thrived on cutting corners and cozying up to gray areas. I hadn't thought of it as ammunition then, more like an instinct. The way you might keep a copy of your passport tucked inside a drawer you never open, hoping you'll never need it, but knowing you. I stared at the USB under the lamplight. It looked harmless, innocent even, like it couldn't possibly hold the weight it did. I thought about Nathan, standing in the doorway of the office he didn't earn, casually ending 17 years with a flick of entitlement. I thought about the others, Maria, Colin, everyone, discarded because they didn't fit his shiny new vision. The bitterness I had tasted earlier deepened into something richer. Not rage, not yet, just a gathering. I slid the USB into my laptop and began scrolling through the files. Dates, numbers, names, patterns emerging like bruises beneath the skin. This wasn't just a record of mistakes. It was a blueprint for their downfall. Morning blurred into afternoon without me noticing. I sat at the small kitchen table, papers spread around me like fallen leaves. The rain had finally stopped, but the sky outside stayed heavy, as if the storm hadn't fully left yet, just moved somewhere quieter, waiting. Each file I opened peeled back another layer. Loans taken out under false pretenses, vendor payments, siphoned through shell companies, fudged ledgers polished clean for tax season. There was a quiet efficiency to the deceit, the same kind of precision I once took pride in. Only now, it made my skin crawl. For a while, I considered going straight to the authorities. It would have been easy, anonymous, clean, but something about that felt hollow, impersonal. No, this wasn't about vengeance in a tabloid headline. It was about reckoning, about forcing the Halden name to confront the rot it had tried so hard to lacquer over. I needed to be smarter, more deliberate. I thought of Maggie, an old friend from years ago. We had started at Halden Co together before she left for a job in forensic accounting. We hadn't spoken in ages, but the memory of her sharp laugh and sharper mind was enough to push me to find her number. After 2 rings, she answered, and after 5 minutes, she agreed to meet. We sat in a corner booth of a dusty cafe 2 towns over, mugs of burnt coffee between us. Maggie had aged better than I had. Her hair streaked silver at the temples, her hands still steady and sure. She listened without interruption as I laid everything out. When I finished, she leaned back and whistled low. "You're sitting on a ticking bomb," she said. "Handled right, this could bury them." "Not bury," I corrected softly. "Expose." She nodded, understanding more in that moment than 1,000 words could explain. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked carefully, patiently. Maggie helped me cross-reference financials, highlight inconsistencies, flag the most egregious breaches. She taught me how to build a timeline regulators would drool over: clear, undeniable, chronological. Meanwhile, Nathan kept on with his charade. I followed press releases and LinkedIn updates, each one more self-congratulatory than the last. He was expanding the company, launching new projects, talking partnerships. Every photo showed him grinning like the world was already his. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because while Nathan polished his empire for Instagram, he had no idea the foundation beneath him was rotted through. No idea that every click of my mouse, every late-night email with Maggie, was another crack forming under his expensive shoes. No idea that sometimes the quietest revenge isn't shouted from rooftops, it's whispered, and it's inevitable. It took a few discreet inquiries to track him down. Mr. Langford, the company's former financial advisor, had slipped into retirement without fanfare, as though erasing himself from the world he'd spent decades navigating. A small bungalow at the edge of town, half hidden by a bramble of overgrown hedges. No nameplate, just a cracked stone walkway leading to a weather-worn door. I knocked twice. The door creaked open, and there he stood, thinner than I remembered. The proud line of his jaw softened by time. His eyes, though, were still sharp. "Still wary, Eleanor Marsh," I said simply. Recognition flickered across his face, chased quickly by caution, but he stepped aside and let me in. His living room smelled of dust and old wood smoke. The television was off, the mantel was cluttered, with forgotten trophies and a faded photo of a woman I assumed was his late wife. We sat opposite each other, 2 relics of a world Nathan Halden had never cared to understand. I laid a single envelope on the coffee table between us, thick with printed copies of the digital files. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Mr. Langford thumbed through the first few pages, his hands trembling slightly. Whether from age or anger, I couldn't tell. After several minutes, he set the papers down, took off his glasses, and rubbed his face with both hands. "I knew," he said hoarsely. "I knew they were playing games, but I never thought it was this bad." "It's worse," I said quietly. "This is just what I could prove." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers. For a long moment, there was only the ticking of an old wall clock. "If this gets out," he muttered, almost to himself, "the boy won't survive it. Neither will his father." I folded my hands in my lap. I'm not interested in survival or destruction, just truth. He studied me then, really studied me, as if weighing my soul against the paperweight gravity of what I'd brought him. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "All right," he said. "Let's make sure they can't squirm out of this." The agreement didn't need a handshake. It sat there between us, unspoken, heavy, inevitable, like a storm gathering far beyond the hills. The notice came 3 weeks later, a formal letter from the Department of Financial Conduct, crisp and cold, stamped in red across the top: audit notice, immediate compliance required. It hit the office like a thunderclap. I heard about it from Maggie first. She sent a single message: "It's starting, no details, none needed." Nathan had been preparing for a flashy expansion announcement, a press conference with catered lunches and shiny new banners. Instead, he was greeted by 3 government agents in gray suits, each carrying briefcases heavier than his self-importance. The walls of Halden Co, once filled with the low hum of industrious chatter, quickly turned brittle. You could smell the fear sharp and metallic. Staff tiptoed through hallways, eyes averted. Files vanished from desktops overnight. Meeting rooms stayed locked, blinds pulled tight. Nathan didn't take it well. He started with bravado, laughing off the audit, making jokes about routine checks and bureaucratic nonsense. But as the days stretched into weeks, and the investigators dug deeper, that veneer cracked. He blamed everyone but himself. He fired 2 junior accountants for negligence. He berated the HR manager so badly in front of the entire office that she quit on the spot. Desperation bled through every email, every poorly masked tantrum, and the more he flailed, the deeper the audit went. Hidden loans surfaced. Offshore transfers he thought were invisible, shown under forensic lights. Old contracts signed under questionable. Terms were pulled apart clause by clause. Nathan's name was on all of it now, his fingerprints, his inherited arrogance. Maggie kept me updated, slipping me tidbits over coffee meetings and late-night texts. Each revelation was another stone, added to the avalanche gathering momentum above him. I never gloated. There was no pleasure in seeing a life unravel. Only a grim sense of balance being restored, like a crooked painting finally righting itself on the wall. One afternoon, I walked past the old office building just to see it. The windows, once so clean, looked smudged now, tired. A delivery truck. Idled outside, boxes piled high with who knew what, shredded documents, abandoned plans, broken promises. The empire Nathan thought he was building wasn't crumbling. It was rotting from the inside out, and the worst part? He still hadn't realized the most dangerous wounds are the ones you never see coming until it's far too late. I wrote the letter by hand, no grand declarations, no threats or demands, just a simple quote, inked in steady lines across thick paper. What's buried doesn't rot. It waits. I folded the paper neatly, once, then again. Slipped it into a plain white envelope along with a single photograph, a scanned copy of the original. Forged loan document, Mr. Halden's unmistakable signature curling across the bottom. A relic Nathan had inherited without understanding the weight it carried. I didn't send it to the office. I sent it to his home. A sprawling, sterile house in the hills with glass walls and a manicured lawn no one ever walked on. I imagined the envelope landing among glossy magazines and credit card offers, looking utterly unremarkable. That was the point. No fireworks, no chaos. Just a slow, creeping realization that the past wasn't done with him yet. I walked to the corner mailbox and dropped it in myself, the envelope slipping through the slot with a final, whispering thunk. No witnesses. No second thoughts. 3 days later, the subpoena came. It arrived with the Morning Post, a thick manila envelope that couldn't be mistaken for anything but bad news. Nathan was seen outside the office that afternoon, pacing, red-faced, phone glued to his ear. Staff whispered. Some smiled behind coffee cups. Others just shook their heads. By nightfall, news had leaked. An internal investigation was underway. Regulatory bodies were involved. Civil suits were whispered in legal circles. Investors began pulling out, cautious hands withdrawing from a fire, about to swallow everything. Nathan tried to control the narrative, released a statement about unforeseen accounting discrepancies and temporary challenges. But the cracks were already visible. The polished surface he'd painted so carefully peeled back, revealing the rot underneath. I didn't watch the news coverage. I didn't need to. Sometimes you don't need to see the tree fall to know that it's falling. You just feel the shift in the air, the way the ground braces itself for impact. Sitting by my window that evening, the sky bruised purple with the coming storm, I sipped my tea and waited. Not for revenge, not for apologies, just for the truth to finish what it had started. The news broke quietly at first, a buried article halfway down the finance section. Then it spread like a slow leak, small, insistent, impossible to ignore. Nathan Halden removed from CEO position amid allegations of financial misconduct. The words were dry, clinical. They didn't capture the desperate scramble behind the eye. Scenes, the emergency board meetings, the carefully worded statements crafted to protect what little dignity remained. They didn't capture the sight of Nathan being escorted out of the building he once swaggered through, head bowed, tie askew. The Investors pulled out faster than anyone expected. Clients abandoned ship. Contracts were voided. Within weeks, Halden Co. was little more than a husk, its grand ambitions reduced to settlement talks and bankruptcy filings. Even his father, old Mr. Halden, wasn't spared. His name surfaced in the investigations, dragged back into the light he had so carefully avoided. In a final act of cowardice, he released a statement blaming Nathan for unauthorized decisions and personal failings. Blood doesn't protect you when the money's at stake. I watched it unfold from a corner cafe, a place I had discovered on one of my long walks. Small wooden tables, the smell of roasted coffee beans hanging thick in the air. Rain streaked. The windows again, soft and relentless. I wasn't there to gloat. I didn't feel the rush of victory I thought I might. What settled over me instead was something quieter, heavier. A long, deep exhale I hadn't known I'd been holding. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. Sometimes it's just the absence of a weight that once sat heavy on your chest. I stirred a spoon through my tea, watching the tiny eddies form and vanish. In the background, the news played on a muted television mounted high on the wall. Nathan's name scrolled past in the ticker, just another casualty in a world too busy to care for long. The world moved on, and so did I. I finished my tea, left, a tip folded neatly under the saucer, and stepped out into the rain. It felt cleaner this time, like something had finally been washed away, leaving only the scent of wet earth and the faint, sharp promise of something new. I didn't look back. Some endings are better honored in silence. I didn't rush to replace the life I lost. There was no frantic job hunt, no desperate climb back onto the corporate ladder. For the first time in years, my days unfolded slowly, like hands opening after being clenched too long. I took long walks through the park near my flat, letting the seasons shift around me without urgency. I spent afternoons in secondhand bookstores, running my fingers over cracked spines and yellowed pages, reacquainting myself with the parts of me that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or meeting deadlines. Eventually, I found a part-time job at a small, locally owned bookshop tucked away, on a quiet street. No titles, no office politics, just the soft murmur of conversations, the smell of old paper and coffee, the rhythmic peace of shelving stories. My world had shrunk, yes, but it felt vast in a way I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. Some mornings, I would pass by the old Halden Co building on my way to the market. The windows were dark now, the lobby stripped bare. A for-lease sign tilted awkwardly in the front window, rain spotting the paper. Sometimes I would pause, just for a breath, letting the memory of that place pass over me like a cloud. I didn't feel anger anymore, or bitterness. Just a strange, distant kind of gratitude. It had taken losing everything I thought I needed to remember who I actually was. I began filling my flat with small, beautiful things, chipped teacups from charity shops, pressed flowers between the pages of my journals, postcards from places I dreamed of visiting. My life, once organized into neat, rigid categories, now bloomed in wild, colorful chaos. And when people asked me what I did, strangers at markets, new acquaintances in passing, I would smile, slow and real, and say, I help people find stories. It was enough. It was more than enough. There's a kind of silence that isn't lonely. It's a silence that hums with possibility. A wide open space where the future isn't a deadline or a threat, but a question waiting to be answered. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't afraid of the answer. It was a Sunday when I finally opened the drawer, not out of need or fear or even curiosity, just something quiet inside me nudging toward closure. The same way you might return to a place long after the crowd has left. Not to relive it, but to understand it. The filing cabinet still sat in the corner of my bedroom, unchanged, half swallowed by shadows. I knelt in front of it, the way I had months ago, and pulled the bottom drawer open. The metal groaned in protest, but gave way. There, tucked beneath a stack of old documents, lay the original USB drive. Dusty, scratched at the edges. I picked it up, holding it in the light like an artifact. It felt heavier now, though I knew that was just memory settling into its true shape. Next to it was a folded piece of paper, one I had nearly forgotten. It was the note I wrote to myself the night I was fired. On impulse, with no clear reason, only instinct. A single line scribbled in dark ink across the center. They underestimated the quiet ones. I read it twice, then again. It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like a promise I had kept. Didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed in the moment, let it settle over me like the final note of a long, haunting song. Not triumphant, not tragic, just true. I placed the USB back in the drawer and locked it. Not out of secrecy, but preservation. It was no longer a weapon. It was a reminder of the line I wouldn't let them cross, of the woman they thought could be erased in an afternoon meeting. I made tea, sat by the window as golden light poured across the floor. The world outside moved slowly, a cyclist humming past, children laughing 2 streets over, the hum of someone mowing a lawn. Of it ordinary, all of it miraculous. I thought back to that first day, the rain, the silence, the sting of betrayal, and how I'd walked out with nothing but a box and a hollowed-out space where purpose used to be. And yet somehow, from that space, something real had grown, not louder, not bigger, just truer. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can become is the person they never imagined you had the strength to be.